For more, joined by Michelle Goldberg, New York Times columnist, David French, National Review Institute Senior Fellow, Eugene Robinson, columnist at The Washington Post, and Sahil Kapoor, national political reporter for Bloomberg Politics. Sahil, let me start with you. Just big picture in terms of what this says, what Florida is telling us through these two primary wins last night, DeSantis and Gillum, about where the two-party bases are right now.
Steve, this could be the single most fascinating race on the 2018 ballot in November. You've got a pure distillation of where the two-party bases are going, as you pointed out in the intro. You have a candidate that excites the grassroots left and a Republican candidate who is loyal to President Trump and who is very much aligned with the president. And I think that captures where this is all going in the two parties. Now, Florida, big picture, is a perfect distillation of what's on the ballot in the 2018 election. You have a governor's mansion in the third largest state in the country that controls the keys to redistricting for the next decade. You've got a Senate race in that state that could determine the balance in that chamber. You've got 7 or 8 competitive House races that could decide who controls the majority. So it is all happening in the Sunshine State. Yeah, and Michelle, in terms of what's happening inside the Democratic Party, obviously this was a big upset yesterday. Not many people were predicting Gillum would win. What does it tell you about the choices that Democratic voters have decided to make in the Trump era?
So I first met Andrew Gillum a year ago at Netroots Nation, and I kind of asked him the same question that I think a lot of people are asking, which is, can an unabashedly progressive African-American candidate really win in the South, right? This strategy that he's trying, Stacey Abrams, the gubernatorial candidate in Georgia, is also trying, basically saying that appealing to white moderate swing voters hasn't worked. Let's try to put together a coalition of minorities, young people, and urban white liberals, because demographically it's possible in both of these places. And as for the question of can it work, he basically said, well, the other strategy has failed over and over again, right? Democrats have lost the governor's race in Florida 4 times in a row. And so it's not necessarily safer to go with a kind of quote unquote safe white moderate, because it's just failed over and over again. And I think that has been the lesson since Trump, is that I think before Trump, there was a lot of focus on numbers, on data analytics. And one of the lessons, I think, of that race is that passion and charisma and all of those kind of political intangibles, enthusiasm, also really, really matter.
Yeah, and David, that's interesting, because what Michelle's describing there is sort of how Democrats psychologically maybe have reacted to the loss in 2016. The idea that, hey, a strategic change is in order here. The old model, the traditional model, not working. Let's go with something, a new strategy here, as she's outlining it. The Republican response to Trump, though, if we're to read into this DeSantis win, big in terms of margin last night, is a Republican electorate that, I hate to use the cliche, wants to double down on Trump.
Well, there's this contest between those who say the key to politics now in this closely divided country is mobilization, or the key to politics in a closely divided country is persuasion, winning people over. I think one of the lessons that the GOP took away from 2016 was, no, the key is mobilization. The key is firing up your people. The Democrats, as Michelle accurately noted, have had real struggles in states like Florida and Georgia. And so it makes sense for them to try something else. The thing that I would note, though, is Florida is one of these states that's a decreasingly favorable playing field for Democrats of late. It's almost like the mirror image of Virginia, which has been getting increasingly blue. Florida's been getting increasingly red. So the odds are against Gillum, I believe. A blue wave could carry him, but absent that blue wave, I don't see it happening. Yeah, you got the governor's race and that Senate race there as well. But Eugene Robinson, also, we say, look, the campaign began today, this general election campaign down there in Florida, and we have this controversy. We set it up there at the beginning. It is over the question of race, over the intent. What was the intent of Ron DeSantis in making those statements? In some ways, that has been a major feature of the Trump era. Controversies about statements about race, what the intention was, how the audience receives it. How do you read what Ron DeSantis said there? Because the claim you hear from Gillum is this is clear racial politics on his part. Do you read it that way, or do you read it as an innocent statement, as he says it was?
Well, you know, you don't get to determine how people hear what you say, and I certainly heard. Look, I give him a pass on articulate in context, right? Because in many contexts that could be a racial reference, but in this context, he inarticulate, spokesman for socialist values. Okay, you give him a pass on that, but monkey this up. That's not an idiom. I mean, that's not an expression. That's not something that people say. And so absolutely it struck me as I believe Mr. Gillum said, not a dog whistle, but a bullhorn. And I think I think that's the way this race is going to go. I mean, this could become a very ugly sort of bare knuckles race in which you see some of the worst tendencies of Trumpism just coming to the fore.
David, I'm curious, you've written critically about Donald Trump, what Eugene is saying there. Do you see in those comments from DeSantis today some of the worst instincts of Trumpism? How do you interpret it?
I really don't. I see him as trying and then bungling a bit, and what was really pretty standard campaign rhetoric. My opponent is a formidable opponent. He did well in the debates. He's not my cup of tea, but his ideas are bad for Florida. I mean, it's really, except for that word, but very normal campaign rhetoric. I do not think, if you look at DeSantis's record and you compare it, say, with Trump's record, that you can make any kind of comparison there at all. With Donald Trump, there is a whole history and a background that says, look, when Donald Trump uses a word, there's not a benefit of the doubt there. DeSantis is a different guy. In context here, I think it was very clear he was praising his opponent's campaigning skills and saying his ideas were bad for the state. That's normal politics. That's acceptable politics.
Michelle, sounds
well,
like
I don't understand the idea that DeSantis comes from a somewhat different political context than Donald Trump, right? I mean, last year, DeSantis spoke at an alt-right event with people like Milo and Ann Coulter and Katie Hopkins, who's, kind of a rabid Islamophobic character from Britain. So he's very much of that world. You couldn't find a more slavish toady for Trump. I think his commercial shows his children building a fake wall, which I think makes him a pretty bad father as well as a bad person. But the idea that he deserves the benefit of the doubt, I mean, I don't know what was in his head. I don't think any of us do. But he comes out of a political world in which racist dog whistles are completely standard fare.
I guess, David, that is a question. Maybe we say this is a preview for 2020, potentially, about Trump-era politics. Given the alliance that DeSantis forged with Trump, he thanked him last night. A big part of his appeal, obviously, was having Trump support. When you seek out and cultivate support from Trump, are you, in some way, even if the wording was as innocent as you believe it was, are you cultivating these controversies in some way?
Well, look, if you're a GOP official and you're not seeking out Trump, not seeking out his endorsement, especially in a state like Florida, where he's got a positive, by many polls, a positive approval rating, you're courting political disaster. And look, I have criticized Trump strongly on multiple grounds because his entire history demonstrates that he doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. The contrast here is the context of those actual conversations demonstrate that I believe that DeSantis deserves the benefit of the doubt. And look, the commercials, I don't like the commercials either. But to say it shows he's a bad dad, I mean, come on. That is over the line. Look, this is going to be a contentious race, no doubt about it. Every close race is going to be a contentious race. And I think it's incumbent on members of the press to be able to look and say, okay, fairly, I don't think that this was a dog whistle. And then fairly, looking at it fairly in context, I do think it's a dog whistle. If we're pushing everything to 11, we're going to be seeing our negative polarization in this country spiral out of control.
Sahil, the other word that popped up there that we're not talking about, though, that in what DeSantis had to say was socialism. In this attack, Bernie Sanders came in at the end and endorsed Gillum in this race, and this idea of Republicans trying to run against, hey, the Democrats have moved to the left, they've embraced socialist ideas. Among Democrats, is there a concern that classically, until the last year or two, no Democrat in Washington would have said you could be anywhere near that label and have a chance of winning? Has the thinking changed there at all among Democrats?
Steve, I think it has changed in part, and it's a generational thing. I think older American voters, when they think of socialism, they think of the Soviet Union. They maybe think of Venezuela. Younger people think of Scandinavia. They think of Norway and Sweden. So I just don't think the word has the same has the same impact on younger Americans. And clearly it shows, I think we see this from yesterday's primary, Bernie Sanders' support of Gillum, as well as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's victory, that there is a faction of the Democratic Party that is open to Scandinavian-style democratic socialist ideas. That may not work all over the country, but that's a huge part of it. And the second dynamic that is critical, I think, for Democrats is the demographic one. Voters who lean Democrat want representatives who are culturally relevant to them, who look like them, who are not, predominantly older and white voters, in a party that is increasingly, powered by minorities, by millennials, and by younger women.
Yeah, Eugene, the most interesting thing to me about Gillum, when you look at his political profile, is Bernie Sanders, as we say, comes in for him at the end of this race. Medicare, for a lot of sort of Sanders issues, those sort of lefty issues right now in the Democratic Party. But also, this is somebody, he was, I think, a Hillary Clinton delegate in 2016. And Hillary Clinton, how did she beat Bernie Sanders so badly in those southern primaries? Overwhelming support from black voters. He had overwhelming support, it looks like, from black voters yesterday, almost seeing it politically a hybrid of Sanders and Clinton and what they brought out in 2016.
Right, you were right to bring that up, because he was a Clinton supporter in 2016. He's now supported by Bernie Sanders. Look, I don't think Gillum or many Democratic candidates are going to run around, waving a socialist flag with the word socialism written on it. They're going to support policies that others may describe as socialist. They're going to talk about universal health care. They're going to talk about the student loan crisis in ways that that some people will brand socialism. But the key, as you mentioned, is going to be intensity among Democratic voters and bringing them out to the polls. Democrats don't vote in midterms, and that's the big problem, and that's why, I think it's right that Gillum kind of starts in a hole here, but he can win this if he can sufficiently motivate Democrats to do something they don't usually do, which is really care about a midterm election and really come out and vote.
All right, yeah, the margin in 2016, Trump won Florida a little less than 2 points. All right, Eugene Robinson, Michelle Goldberg, David French, Sahil Kapoor, thank you all for joining us. And coming up, President Trump tweeted today that White House counsel Don McGahn is leaving his job, which apparently came as a surprise to McGahn. Could it be because of McGahn's extensive